Okay, so we'll start, and I will give the floor to Brian for the last session, the challenges of the open breeding and racing industry. And the biggest challenge, as you all know, is the Brexit that we will part, but we will also take this occasion to hear about the development of the work of the IMHF, who has been growing year after year and is doing a great job. So I give the floor to his chairman, Brian, and our vice chairman.
Thank you, Louis. And I've been told not to do any Irish advertising now by Louis, so I won't mention the Ford Irish breadwinners yesterday. But again, just to reiterate the thanks to France Gatto for everything over the weekend. You must have a cruel streak in you, Louis, to try and, for the last session of a conference, to put on Brexit and the discussion about Brexit and challenge us to try and make that interesting. So short of Paul Kahn singing a song and Paul Marie Gatto telling a few jokes, we'll try and maybe explain to some of our non-European colleagues the big issue that we're facing here in Europe, and particularly in Ireland as a result of the Brexit vote, and maybe touch on a couple of other challenges that we see facing European racing going forward. I think on Brexit, the one good thing I see in this process is it has probably challenged us to look at the fundamentals of our business, and I see nothing but cooperation and unity amongst particularly Britain, Ireland and France. We went with Louis recently to the European Commission, the three countries together with the chairman of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities, which I think sent out a very powerful message to the European Commission in terms of the way in which the racing authorities do business. And if there's any positive in the Brexit process, and I really don't think there are many, it has maybe given us some reassurance that the work which is done, much of it in this room, down through the years on things like transport of horses, on things like identification, on things like welfare, on things like passports, microchipping, all those sort of things are really very sophisticated in terms of other agricultural activities and other businesses. And I think, you know, in dealing with the Commission, and it's clear that Louis and Paul Marie have been dealing with the European Commission over the years, it was clear that they respected the processes and the way in which racing authorities go about their business. So if there's any silver lining to the cloud of Brexit, it is that. So quickly, just to set the scene in relation to the challenges facing European racing and breeding. Obviously, Europe is the home of horse racing. I'm reading Chris McGrath's book, The Darley Arabian now, which sort of talks about the time in which the whole thing started, and it's the home of racing and breeding. In pure statistical terms, the European and Mediterranean region accounts for 23% of foals born worldwide, 21% of all races, 16% of prize money offered worldwide, and 30% of betting on racing worldwide. We saw some of that information in Winfried's presentation. Just breaking it down a bit further, on breeding by region, as you can see, Europe accounted for 32,683 mares, 21,856 foals, and as I said, 23% of all births throughout the world. On racing, 23,379 flat races. Quite interesting, really. Europe is the only place now, really, worldwide, which stages jump racing. And Derek McGrath mentioned earlier that jump racing is probably a more popular code in Ireland and to some extent in Britain than flat racing. But what staggered me looking at the IFHA report last year is that outside of Europe, there's 470 jump races staged elsewhere in the world, which is quite a staggering statistic when you consider it in that respect. Jump racing brings a whole different set of challenges, which are probably, based on those figures, mainly European challenges around welfare and around horse welfare. And I know our British colleagues have done a huge amount of work in that area on a race like the Aintree Grand National. Just to expand on the prize money statistics, as you can see, 354 million offered for flat racing in Europe in 2015, the last IFHA annual report based on the 2015 statistics, and 157 million in jumps. it's interesting to see that while the number of races is 20%, the share of prize money is 16%. So obviously Europe has a challenge in the area of prize money. On the other hand, Winfried, to be pleased to see, Asia accounts for 37% of the races, but 50% of the prize money. And not surprisingly, when you come on to betting, a much bigger picture. Asia has a 58% share of the betting worldwide, compared to 30% in Europe. So that just sets the scene in Europe. Just in terms of my own country, we're just in the process of doing a strategic plan for the next 5 years for racing in Ireland. And you know, the key issues that we're facing, which I think probably face most of the other racing authorities in Europe, is the question of a long-term stable funding mechanism, the link with betting, the need to increase the investment by owners and breeders into our business to increase the economic value of the industry. I think a key issue which was touched on briefly this morning is the whole area of ensuring that racing, and going racing in particular, remains relevant to younger generations in a digital age. We have a challenge in Ireland at the moment in terms of people going racing. Our bigger meetings are strong and getting stronger. The more run-of-the-mill meetings are not that strong. But then when you look at the streaming of Irish racing, every Irish race that's run has in excess of 10,000 streams on average, which is people who actually stream it on a telephone or on the internet to have a bet. You know, whilst you may only have 2,000 or 3,000 people at a race meeting, there's 10,000 people watching that race and for the purposes of having a bet. Other challenges, obviously, a key issue which is coming across in Ireland and in Britain, and I'm sure in France, is the whole issue of staff welfare, availability of staff, availability of qualified staff, and the need to look after staff within the industry to the best of our abilities. And the one which was touched on throughout the day, the whole question of animal welfare and the increasing responsibilities that we all have in relation to the horses that give us so much pleasure. And last at the bottom, which probably in the current year in Ireland is top of our list in terms of challenge, is the whole area of Brexit. This is the vote that Britain has taken to the effect that from March 2019 they will no longer be part of the European Union, and that has significant implications for the horse racing business, particularly in France and Ireland, but not just in those two countries, throughout the whole of Europe. From a local point of view in Ireland, the key issues that we're concerned about in Brexit, as you can see on the right, the map of Ireland there shows the location of all our racecourses, and the two at the very top right are Down Royal and Down Patrick. They're in Northern Ireland. After 2019, they will in fact be outside the EU. So we effectively will have two racecourses under our jurisdiction, which will no longer be part of the EU. So that's a complicated issue to get one's head around. The whole question of the border with Northern Ireland is complicated and may provide some potential for imaginative solutions, because I think all the messages that come through from the negotiation is that the situation with regard to Northern Ireland must not be disturbed. But in reality, you know, we operate horse racing in Ireland on an all-island basis. So horses that are born in Northern Ireland are Irish foals, the same as a horse that's born in the far south of our country. We operate trainers that train in Northern Ireland are licensed by the Irish Turf Club. The other issue we're concerned about is and there's about 7,500 horse movements a year for racing, for breeding, or for other purposes across the border, which is seamless at the moment. Obviously, we're concerned about the threat of tariffs on trade. The WTO tariffs are at 13.5% for non-breeding stock animals, so we have a significant trade in Ireland in selling very nice national hunt horses to nice people like Mr. Rust in the UK, and there is a serious danger that post 2019 they could be subject to WTO tariffs, which is a key concern. And the final effect, which we're seeing already, is the effect of the sterling exchange rate, you know, which most of our media rights deals in Irish racing are done in sterling, because the main market for the pictures for Irish racing is the British betting industry. So obviously that's not as valuable as it was before. A sterling buyer coming to buy at the bloodstock sales in Ireland is now getting, you know, 15% less for his his pound than he was 18 months ago. So they're the main concerns in Ireland. But I suppose the real issue in relation to Brexit is that, as I said, racing is run on an all-island basis, but also racing between Britain and Ireland is, I've said, it's actually the best example you will find in either the sporting or business world of total integration between our two countries. The horse racing industry and the bloodstock industry in Britain and Ireland effectively operate as one, different governing bodies, different jurisdictions, but any day of the week you pick up the newspaper, you will have Irish jockeys riding in Britain, you'll have British horses running in Ireland, you'll have British buyers at Irish sales, you'll have Irish horses being sold in Britain, and if you go into a betting shop in Ireland, there's no distinction between the British offering and the Irish offering. You know, they offer 4 or 5 race meetings a day, and they're deemed to be one and the same. Britain is a very important country for us in terms of selling media rights, selling horses, and promoting our business. As I said, and Paul Marie will maybe go into a bit more detail on this, you know, we've 17,000 horse movements between Britain and Ireland each year. You know, that's a lot of movements. We operate a single stud book between Britain and Ireland, and in a meeting we had with the European Commission recently, you know, ironically, the question of the Commission will now have to, what's the word, Paul Marie, verify or approve the stud book of a third country that's outside the EU. So the mother stud book of all the stud books, maybe the one that it's hardest to get approval for. But then you have the complication that 60% of the foals that go into that stud book each year are born in Ireland, which is in the EU. So it's very complicated. As I said, 80% of our bloodstock sales in Ireland are to Britain, and many of our media rights contracts are in sterling. So Brexit, you know, in practical terms, causes a huge issue. And I know maybe not as big as those figures, but the exact same issues apply in relation to trade with France, and it's difficult. So just to give a practical, funny example of the implications of Brexit, that's Harvey the goat on the left-hand side. The horse on the right-hand side is a very, very good horse called Sizing John, who won the Cheltenham Gold Cup in Cheltenham last year. He's a very, very good Irish racehorse. But Sizing John is a bit nervous, and he gets afraid in his stables at night time. And in typical farming fashion, the trainer got him a companion. So he has a goat companion who he'll go nowhere without, Harvey the goat. And that's Harvey been interviewed on ITV TV there recently. But just to give a practical illustration of Brexit, talking to the trainer, Henry de Bromhead there, when he was bringing the horse to Cheltenham, not this year, last year. Because of the tripartite agreement and because of the work that we've done as racing authorities down through the years, there was absolutely no issue whatsoever with moving the horse between Ireland and Britain. But it took him 15 days with the Ministry for Agriculture to get permission to bring Harvey the goat with the horse. He said the vet had to come out and inspect the goat, deem that he was healthy. The goat had to have his paperwork at the port with him when he was going to Cheltenham. And really the point of it is, it's a terrifying indication of a worst case scenario if that's what had to happen every time we moved a horse to Britain. And you know, I know it's a funny example, and the irony of it all is that this same goat has now featured in CNN, Reuters, and the Financial Times. And quite worryingly, a German television station rang up about 2 weeks ago and wondered, would I be prepared to do an interview with the goat on television? But I think just without being without being light, I knew I recognised the voice. But without being lighthearted, I think, you know, we've got a good system, and Paul Marie will illustrate that a bit more. But this was a horrific story. Fortunately, the goat got to Cheltenham, the horse won the Gold Cup, and the rest is history. So maybe that's a lighthearted note. So we've 2 presentations to hear, from 2 real experts in the field. Paul Marie Gatto is a long valued colleague who has done an awful lot of work in this area. He's the head veterinary officer for France Gallo, head of horses and control department, and he's the co-chairman of the European and Mediterranean Studbook Liaison Committee. More importantly, he is a man, unlike myself, who doesn't work in an office. He works out in the field with horses, and certainly at a recent, I suppose Nick and Louis were there, bureaucratic meeting that we had in the European Commission. This man spoke from the heart as someone who has to lay hands on horses from time to time, and it was the most effective contribution of the day. So maybe if you'll welcome Paul-Marie Gatto, who will talk from a technical point of view on the issues of Brexit.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to be in front of you and to speak, even if the subject is a very painful subject. To understand the Brexit or the consequences of the Brexit, we have to go back and see how our countries in Europe are integrated, and a strong cooperation did exist before the two first countries, Ireland and Great Britain, joined the European Community in 1973. One of the most visible signs of integration was and is always the tripartite agreement, which has been signed before the entrance of the two countries in the European Union. And this agreement has been accepted by the European Commission according to the EC Directive 2009/156. It is important to see that it is a whole agreement, but this agreement has been reshaped by the European Commission, and so now it will be very difficult to say it did exist before the Brexit, and we will continue that after the Brexit, because now it's become a part of the legislation of the European Union. But let's see the beginning. At the inception, 40 years ago, the TPA, the tripartite agreement, was implemented for all horses and ponies. And they have just to have a passport to move between the three countries without any formalities, administrative or sanitary administrative documents. Despite the fact that no outbreaks has been disseminated during this period, and in order to face the new sanitary risk, the free movement of horses has been restricted to the thoroughbred industry and the IFHA in 2014 with an improved traceability system. At this time, the European Commission said, okay, guys, it is dangerous to move horses from in between the three countries, so the only thoroughbred and IFHA give guarantees, so they will continue, but not the other. The tripartite is not only an agreement for moving horses, this is also an economic tool for the trade development. It facilitates trade and communication within the three countries, and it ensures trade safety. The TPA has helped prevent a significant disease outbreak in the last 45 years. But it's not only an irrepressible system for Ireland, Great Britain, and France, it is also an essential tool for the other European countries. The TPA has permitted the expansion of racing, breeding, and also public sales in Europe, which have become an outlet for 22,000 thoroughbreds produced every year by the European breeders. The economic integration and the interdependence are the description of our system. In racing, close relationship between the three governing bodies, data and information exchange, sanitary survey, scientific liaison for anti-doping issue medical issue, licensing cooperation, and rule harmonization. All of that has been done in the cooperation and the integration of our industry. But on the top of that, it is in breeding that we have had the most efficient effect, full integration between the GSB and the French stud book. It has been said that there is only one stud book for Ireland and Great Britain, the mother stud book, the GSB, but there is a full integration between the GSB and the French stud book with a co-management of the European and Mediterranean area with my friend Simon Cooper, who is here. Thank you, Simon. And we have seen also the development of scientific liaison on genetic issue, technical issue, and close relationship not only between the stud book, but also between the breeder association, the Thoroughbred Breeders Association in IFHA, with technical and sanitary harmonization and development and lobbying. If you see some key economic data, and I will just recall a few figures. 87% of thoroughbred births are in the 3 countries and in Europe, in all Europe. 230 race courses, 155,000 employment, 25,000 movement of horses in between the 3 countries. If we want to describe our system we have built during decades and decades, it is integration, interdependence. We can add also harmonization. And then the Brexit arrived. And on March 2019, the United Kingdom will leave the European Union and become a third country. And we have very few time to prepare that, and it will be a very difficult challenge. For mutual benefit after the UK leaves the EU, we will have to address all the subjects in order to maintain the cooperation and the integration of the thoroughbred horse breeding and racing industry across Europe. It's not a simple issue because, as you can see in the left part of the slide, the EU negotiator position is very simple. On March 2019, the United Kingdom will be a third country and the TPA will not more exist. And the future status of the UK can't be the same as it was before the Brexit. Moreover, we have been told that we won't obtain the same status for Great Britain as it is given to Switzerland currently. Switzerland is not in the European Union, but have a special status, and we can quite easily move horses from Switzerland to France or to Germany. But it won't be the solution. We have been told that it will not be the solution. The UK position is that the UK government has committed to transposing EU standard into the UK, so there is a robust basis for continuing equivalence on the UK leaving the EU. And such equivalence in standard can be maintained in the longer term by EU and the UK mutual recognition and for the bilateral official control. It could be simple like that, but it was not so simple for the EU negotiator position, and as you can see on the left part of the slide, they haven't changed anything to their position. So we come back again with the industry position, and not only the UK position. We need to protect the economic and technical interests of the industry. And the restriction imposed to the UK will finally penalize the Irish and French interest, but also the other European nations which maintain trading activity in the UK. clearly we said to the European negotiator, okay, you want to punish Great Britain, but you are going to punish the Irish industry and the French industry, and we are still Europeans, so you must be very, very careful for that. The repercussion on the racing and the breeding activity can be on the equine health, the equine identification, the zootechnical rules. We have been told very recently in Brussels that the Mother Stud Book will be approved, and they will lodge, the UK will lodge an application in order to have the Mother Stud Book recognized by the European Commission. Racehorse movement and the TPA will be put down. The food safety, the border inspection post will be also issued, the tariff and the equine welfare. So we work already with our counterparts, with our friends from the three countries, and we put in face the challenge some proposal of solution. Mutual recognition of a common health status. But when you see that, it was like that in the past, during decades and decades. We have the same status, the same health status. And we work during decades to obtain that. So it is clearly our interest. And we are saying to the European negotiator, it is the fact now, it is realized. We can just commit to say it will be also our interest in the future, and we will do it. Mutual recognition of the thoroughbred stud book, it will be a nightmare or a ridiculous situation if the GSB won't be recognized by the European Commission. Mutual equivalence of the zootechnical regulation. It is linked to the stud book recognition. TPA should continue in an evolved form. It is clear that we can't in the future call that a TPA. We will reinvent a new system, but clearly we want to reorganize everything, but we need to have a free movement or an easy movement at least in between the three countries. The food chain and the meat residue survey should keep the same security level. And for the border inspection post, they have to allow a fluent custom passage. And we say that to the negotiator. You can imagine that we will have on March 2019, thousands of horses moving in the three countries with 100 lorries at the border inspection post. And it's not only our problem, it will be also your problem. You have to build office for that. You have to recruit civil agents for that. You have to give a lot of money for something which is today considered as not necessary. I don't speak about tariff because tariff, it is just a small part of the negotiation in the agriculture discussion, and agriculture is not a small part, but not a big part in the general negotiation. But equine welfare is very important, and I think that the equine welfare will be taken in charge by the European Commission. We took action already. The IFHA General Assembly has agreed a common position and an official statement, and several European countries have already sent to their commissioner and appropriate ministry a letter which highlight our serious concern. The three countries most potentially affected are in permanent contact on the subject, and their representatives have already met Commissioner Phil Hogan in charge of agriculture at the EU Commission. And I'm very pleased, happy to see that Commissioner Phil Hogan is very nice, very in favor of our industry, and listen to us, and he will be very influential in the negotiation. IFHA Chairman Louis Romanet has sent a letter to the negotiate head Commissioner Michel Barnier and the delegation of the representative of the three countries led by Louis Romanet has been received in Brussels by the negotiator task force. Our proposal to the EU negotiator to be accepted as a part of the negotiation on the equine sector, and our commitment, we will be a constructive partner with a full care of the common interest of all the involved nations. We are already working on innovative procedure acceptable by the EU Commission, and we will propose technical arrangement in order to prevent the difficulties which would happen if the situation is not completely considered. When we meet the task force representative, they stated that while they clearly could not deal with the next phase of the matter until the exit negotiation had been concluded, the Commission would of course consider papers and presentation put forward by the group. So the answer was very clearly, we are in phase one. We can't discuss with you, we can't negotiate. But because through all we have explained on this meeting, they said, okay, there will be a lot of challenge at this time in March, everything must be prepared. So we receive permission, possibility to discuss, not with the task force, but with the EU Commission representative. Those one we discuss with them currently, and we in the past, we used to discuss with them, so we know them very well, and it will be easier to prepare the negotiation with that team. And we will present to our EU usual correspondent our proposal prepared under the authority of IFHA. It is important to have a mediator, to have a worldwide body, and you belong to that body, and it is important. You will be the warrant of the system, and we will guarantee that we are working for the best interest of all the EU nations, and not only the three countries more affected by the situation. And I will be very pleased to answer your question if you have some.
Thank you, Paul-Marie. Before I introduce Paul, maybe if anyone has any questions on Brexit, we might take it now. And Nick, I might just ask you maybe for a comment, or Simon from a British perspective. I mean, I'm very clear. Britain has voted to leave the EU. Britain still remains part of Europe, and there's no doubt that down through the years in horse racing, in horse racing in Europe, Britain has really been a key player in leading the way on a number of committees and the work we do, and on a number of innovations within the industry. That I don't see that changing. And as I said earlier, one of the good things that has come out of this is the level of cooperation is strong, and our interests are aligned. But Brexit is, as the EU Commission said the time we were in with them, he said very clearly, it's a mess, and it's not a mess of our making, but it's not a mess of your making either, Nick. But do you want to give any view on a British perspective of where we are?
Well, it's a very unfortunate situation, isn't it? But we better not get into votes and what happened and why. We are where we are, and I thought Paul-Marie put it very well, summed up the trip. Britain, Ireland and France are together, and the reason we went to this meeting was to try and ensure that an existing agreement could be maintained, and quite clearly it can't in its current form. But this is important for the whole of Europe, as Paul-Marie pointed out, and we stand together with our partners seeking a suitable outcome. And I do believe one can be achieved once we get the first the withdrawal agreement out of the way, but we stand together with our European partners on this.
Yeah, we've been doing. Simon Cooper has been doing a lot of work with the through Weatherby's with the European Commission, and Commissioner Hogan, as Paul Marie said, is the Irish Commissioner, and fortunately he's one of the 25% that I mentioned earlier who has an interest in horse racing. So Weatherby's, the Thoroughbred Breeders Association in the UK, and the British Horse Racing Authority, together with Horse Racing Ireland, the Irish breeders, France Gallo, and the French breeders have been working together. So it's not easy. Simon, have you anything to?
Well, just very briefly, yes, roughly 87% of the trade of horses within Europe is between those three tripartite countries. So that's an enormous figure, and trying to tackle the problems that we face, which are many, we're being asked unique questions. So currently we have, in my case, we have a stud book which operates across, as you mentioned, the integration of those two industries is amazing, and that's been developed over a number of years, a number of decades. So the fact that we now have a stud book which might be considered an EU stud book or a non-third country stud book or partly EU or not is a very difficult question to answer. But when you think Britain does 50% of its trade with Europe, never underestimate the stupidity of the public. And the decision's been made, and we've got to work our way around it. But we're going to be asked over the next 18 months some very, very difficult questions.
Yeah. Louis, have you any views?
No, I must say that, as you mentioned, we have close relations with the European Union representatives that were at the meeting, and we were seeing how embarrassed they were by the situation. Clearly, it's a time of positions, not only for our problem, but for the global negotiation. As we can see in the press, the discussion between the negotiator, its position on both sides, and we have to wait until the first round is achieved. And clearly, we saw in the press recently that there could be an additional 2 years, which would postpone until 2021 the final position. But when you are told that on March 29, 2019, England will become a third country and will be treated like Montenegro, clearly it's not a message that you can receive and accept. And I think the fact that we came united, England, Ireland and France, with a strong position and with the support of IFHA, clearly impressed the negotiation, the task force. And I think we will, by the end, achieve some solutions. But we are coming from far because clearly they don't want the tripartite agreement to remain as it was. So it means we will have to find solutions. But I think we have the right people to be able to work with the European Union staff and to find a solution. But we must not underestimate the difficulties of the situation. And if I have one recommendation to our English friends, is to have another vote and to come back from the Brexit.
Could be worse. Yeah, no, absolutely. Any questions on Brexit, Des?
Thank you, Chairman. Des Layden from the International Thoroughbred Breeders Federation. Just to offer you further support, ladies and gentlemen, following the discussions that took place with the European and Mediterranean Horse Racing Federation, the International Thoroughbred Breeders and the European Thoroughbred Breeders formed a letter in which every country, not just the tripartite countries, but every country that was represented by both, was a signatory that said that the essence of the tripartite agreement was something that had to be preserved and was in the vital interests of every one of those breeders' associations throughout the entirety of Europe. So there is a unanimity in the breeding sector to trying to help you, Chairman, and to assist with this process in the most constructive way possible, and also with the numerous other challenges that face us, for example, difficulties in vaccination and problems with testing protocols for every for many of the international movements that were referred to earlier. So the essence of this is, Chairman, that there is active support and it's there to be drawn any time you want it.
No, I think that's a very important point, and I think that is true. It's very visible, and I think you make a good point, and Paul Marie made it. This tripartite agreement isn't just about the three countries, it's about the whole of Europe. A lot of the trade in breeding between countries like Germany and Italy and France to Ireland and to Irish stallions is through Britain overland. And the Commission did remind us that, you know, whilst it's a concern, the three countries were before them, ultimately these decisions will be taken by the entire European Union, and every country, however big or small its racing sector is, will have the same vote at European Commission level. So that support is appreciated. Any other issues on Brexit? So look, thank you very much. The second part of our presentation, Paul Kahn, who's well known to you, is going to give a brief summary of some of the current issues facing the European and Mediterranean Horse Racing Federation. I'm glad to say we have a federation in place now to deal with various issues across Europe. Paul is well known to all of you. He's an international racing consultant, and he's the IFHA's technical advisor for the European region, closely involved in the TAC committee, and he's Secretary General of the European and Mediterranean Horse Racing Federation. We would be lost without him. He's been involved in racing all his life. He wrote a thesis, of all things, on the social anthropology of British racing industry. He worked for 30 years with Weatherby's and has held a series of senior posts with Weatherby's and within British racing. So Paul is going to give you a brief flavour of his views on the challenges facing Europe at the moment.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be able to talk to you all again. Good afternoon, everybody. I was told that it would be inappropriate for me as a Brit to present to you today on Brexit, and I've rarely been so relieved in my life, I can tell you, because Brexit is something that we just can't get away from in the UK at the moment, as you might imagine. And Paul Marie has done a much better job than I could have done in describing the challenges we face there. So instead, have a look at this. It is, of course, a map of our Euromed region, but what do you think the shading denotes? Is it climate, perhaps? It looks as though it almost could be, doesn't it? But it's not. It's actually a map showing different countries' approaches to the use of the whip in horse racing. I find it fascinating, and I'll return to it later. So what have we been up to at the EMHF? What are the challenges we've been facing? I'm going to be touching on these four themes. First, the need to help our members convince their governments of the benefits of horse racing, and this applies whether their racing industry is in rude health or is dying. Second, the need to ensure best practice is adopted as widely as possible across the region, including in the smallest countries, where it's easy to forget the administrative infrastructure often relies upon volunteer staff. Then the aim of ensuring clarity of the various rules of racing which confront trainers and others when they race internationally, and the ultimate goal of harmonizing those rules. And then finally, the need to ensure that we retain the support of the public in the face of changing attitudes to animal welfare. In Europe, perhaps more so than in the other regions, we are a geographically close-knit patchwork of neighbouring countries whose racing industries are of vastly differing scale and wealth, and there's a lot of interchange between them. Our 28 member countries include the powerhouses of France and Ireland and Great Britain, venerable racing nations such as Germany and Italy, the latter facing a desperate struggle to maintain its place on the world stage, thriving industries as in Turkey and Morocco, resurgent racing industries. We've heard from Spain and our most recent candidate country who joined within the last year is Greece, where again fortunes of racing in that country have upturned. Cooperating blocs, as in Scandinavia and the Central European countries that I spoke to you about a couple of years ago, through to those fighting for their very survival, perhaps in the wake of the horrors of war, such as in Libya, the Ukraine, or simply because of governmental or commercial indifference, such as Austria and the would-be EMHF member, Israel. I believe passionately that it is in all our interests, all our interests, no matter how far or near we may be from Europe, that racing should survive in as many of these countries as possible. There may be little doubt that horse racing as a sport is of decreasing relevance overall to the world's populace, but we're not alone in that. Many sports face exactly the same thing in this world of growing options, competing for our leisure time. But it's not a universal or an inevitable trend. As I say, there are countries whose racing industries are growing at an impressive rate. But the more there are broad swathes of the globe where racing simply doesn't exist, the harder this trend towards contraction will be to mitigate and to put the brakes on. We all benefit if horse racing plays a part, however small, in our neighbouring countries. And in this context, it's heartening to be able to report on good news from a country whose membership we actually had to suspend earlier in the year because the incumbent racing authority was no longer in a position to govern the sport. In Lithuania, which has long been troubled by disputes between the claims of competing bodies, the government, encouraged by the EMHF, has recently, and for the first time, given its official and exclusive recognition to the newly formed Lithuanian Horse Racing Authority. And I'll be making an inspection visit there next month to find out more. On the negative side, a country I had the great pleasure of visiting last year, Israel, which has been represented here for many, many years. Nico Gabay isn't here this year, but he normally is, and which desperately wanted to re-establish domestic racing on the back of income from betting on foreign races, has had a cruel blow to its aspirations since its government came down on the side of those which see gambling as an evil. And this is a classic situation where a racing authority or a nascent racing industry has a profound need to impress its government of the benefits that can derive to them from horse racing. If granted a benign financial environment, racing will repay government handsomely in terms not only of betting tax revenue, though that's important, but also in employment. Racing is a heavy employer of people. It tends, as Brian has said in the case of Ireland this morning, it tends to be rural employment where jobs are increasingly scarce. In economic activity in all kinds of related areas and the general tax take that is generated by such activity, and many softer benefits, such as social cohesion and well-being. No other form of gambling offers these benefits, and there is merit in our all relentlessly getting this message across to our governments, whatever the state of health of our racing industries, and for some of us, it's a pressing need. I felt this was an area in which the IFHA could be of help to its members by gathering, curating, and publishing a central reference source of all the studies that have been carried out worldwide on the economic or social aspect of our sport. And Brian has spoken this morning about the study commissioned by the Horse Racing Ireland that concluded, as he's told us, that racing and breeding in Ireland has a annual benefit of the best part of €2 billion that in a country of only 6 million people. In Britain, a similar study conducted a few years ago concluded that racing and breeding was worth nearly £3.5 billion a few years ago to the British economy. And I believe that on admittedly patchy evidence, the value of racing to Europe alone is over 12 billion euros a year. But we need as much evidence as we can get, and for it to be as up to date as possible. These studies aren't cheap, so it's not something that the IFHA is in a position to do itself for all its members, but it can collate all the evidence that exists, and that is why I can announce today a new service to be launched by the IFHA at the end of the year. We're launching an online reference library of relevant documents worldwide, and it'll appear on the IFHA website under the resources page. And I'd ask you all, please, when you go back home, look into whether there have been any studies which shed light on the economic or social impact of racing in your own countries. And if we would have permission to publish them on the IFHA website, send them in, please, to me or to Andrew Chester, and we will make sure we include them. It's a responsibility which our larger racing nations in the Euromed region feel keenly, that they should be active in bringing the benefits of their experience to racing authorities in the smaller racing countries. And the EMHF has a proud tradition, I would say, of education, and our seminar program is a central activity in this. These are some of the subjects on which we've held seminars in recent years. Handicapping, stewarding. We're coming up with a licensing and integrity seminar, which will touch on betting intelligence, being hosted by the BHA later in the month. One of the most successful came from a Slovakian idea that there should be a major international trainer who travels to one of the smaller countries and gives a masterclass on the trainer's art. Mark Johnston traveled with me to Bratislava last year, and the audience was over 70 strong from many countries. But actually all the seminars have been well attended. The appetite of the smaller countries for learning and adopting best practice always impresses and heartens me. An area in which we've been less active, less successful, relates to the second of our aims, actually, listed within our bylaws, namely to harmonize and apply common rules of racing. But this year we've taken a big step by agreeing to establish a new standing committee to join our existing internal standing committee on the European Union, and 3 other committees which work very closely with us: the European Patent Committee, the European Horse Race Scientific Liaison Committee, and the European Racing Medical Officers Group, known colloquially as the Doctors Group. So we will now also have an EMHF Rules Committee, and it'll work not only to harmonize rules across the region, but also where harmonization has not yet been achieved, and it is a slow process because racing authorities have autonomy, and all that the EMHF or the IFHA can do is to cajole and advise to make sure that trainers and owners and jockeys riding internationally have easy and clear access to the relevant rules that apply to them in the countries they're visiting. A big challenge, and our group will of course work closely with the IFHA's global committee in this area, the International Harmonization of Race Day Rules Committee. We always hear of harmonization, we've heard it a few times today, as a good thing, don't we? To maximize betting interest, spectator understanding, to ease the task of traveling racing professionals. All this is true, but maybe there are a few cases where harmonization might be a bad thing. And this is where I come back to my map. I recently conducted a survey of EMHF member countries' whip rules. And I simply asked, what is the maximum number of hits with the whip that a jockey can make in a race under your rules? These are the results. So you'll see the darkest red represents those countries where there is no such numerical limit, through to orange, where the number is 10 hits or more, to green, where it's between 5 and 9, to blue, where it's between 1 and 4, and to the light blue of Norway, where the whip must not be used. Two things are striking to me about this. First, the diversity on the whip usage that is seen to be acceptable and allowable. And secondly, the very clear correlation that emerges with the most lax rules applied in the hot south of the continent and the most restrictive applying in the colder north. But whatever the underlying cultural explanation, I believe it would be potentially damaging to the racing industries at either end of this spectrum if one were to foist a one-size-fits-all approach on them. Clearly, to apply the no specified limits policy of, let's say, Cyprus or Lebanon to Norway would cause obvious consternation, but also, I think, to impose Norway's zero-tolerance approach in those countries would risk turning off the sports audience there, who presumably see the whip as an integral and positive part of the spectacle. The challenge that we're talking about here is, of course, how to react to societal expectation. And it's clear from this that the social license that we hear so much about is granted according to very different criteria in different countries. But what is also true is that countries are changing their rules in this area of whip use very frequently. And in every case that I've heard about, the number of hits is being reduced. It's never going up. If we'd looked at this map 10 years ago, it would have been a much darker color. So we're all on a journey and sharing the direction of travel. And I think it's indicative of a broader, a more fundamental trend towards placing increased importance on horse welfare. Use of the whip is just one aspect of horse welfare, and actually a pretty crude one, because I think we would all agree it's not really a welfare issue at all. It's an issue of public perception. There are issues our sport must address, which really are relevant to horse welfare, such as casualty rates, misuse of drugs, and aftercare, as we've heard this morning. And the EMHF should play a role in ensuring that such matters are given due and proper consideration by its members. We've started taking the aftercare issue. We invited Di Arbuthnot, whom you heard is the chief executive of IFHA, to address our executive council meeting in August in Jersey, which she did. And we've accepted IFHA's request that they hold their annual forum in 2019 when we have our General Assembly in Norway, thereby exposing the IFHA philosophy still more broadly to our membership. And we can do more. We will seek to ensure that the IFHA Horse Welfare Committee's excellent principles of good practice are front of mind with our member racing authorities, thereby taking the lead of the IFHA and Chairman Romane, who's placed horse welfare as an absolute priority. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Plenty of food for thought there. I'm conscious of the clock and the need to finish up and watch a video of the Ark. Has anybody any questions they'd like to ask based on the presentations? No? Well then, sorry, Simon.
Sorry, just a very quick one. Paul mentioned there the difficulties of one-size-fits-all on rules, and in Winfrey's session, the harmonization of rules was seen as critically important. Does he not see, or do we not see, rules becoming harmonized eventually, which is quite clearly seen as a very important move forward?
I think Paul makes a fair point, you know, that one size may not fit all in certain instances. But I've no doubt that as we become more globalised, there's going to be more focus on it. I mean, harmonised rules doesn't, I mean, we've harmonised rules in rugby and football, and we still hear people giving out about the referees making a ridiculous decision. So it doesn't guarantee that we're going to be immune from that. But I certainly think in a number of areas, progress is being made, and more will be made as more of the international competition, which our first session this afternoon spoke about, takes place. Okay. Thank you. Just to thank Paul Kahn and Paul-Marie Gatto.
Thank you, Brian. So we're coming to the closing remarks. As you can clearly see from the presentations made today, there are many challenges that each of us must meet in our home countries and across multiple borders. The future will be equally daunting, but I remain optimistic that the passion of our stakeholders and customers will lead us to more fruitful days. The Federation itself has been fortunate to be led by steady, talented and thoughtful leaders in the form of our 3 vice-chairmen for many years. Our Executive Director and Secretary General, working in tandem with our committee heads and technical advisor, are consistently at the forefront of most pressing matters facing our industry, fully able to provide clear, decisive and practical solutions. And since the retirement of our long-standing secretary, Martine Gaudron, I'm very happy to have our new secretary, Catherine Mingot, skillfully guide us through the activities and meeting of this second art weekend at Chantilly, which I can say was globally a real success. Our regional organizations are taking a more active role to harmonize. Harmonize doesn't mean having exactly the same rule. And for the WIP, I can answer that my philosophy is that it should be improved in order to have the same number of hits, but it's more important that everybody use the paddle whip because this means much more for the global welfare of the horse than 3 or 4 hits, which is not a real difference. We have heard a great deal about the IFHA, and I must commend Brian Kavanagh and Paul Kahn for their achievements. The various technical seminars that they organize, as well as the critical function they are now taking in Brussels, are a clear example of how racing is always better suited to work collectively rather than apart. And I think the Brexit is a marvelous example. OSAF, the longest-standing regional group, has been making their mark in South America in a more pronounced way. The Longines Gran Premio Latinoamericano has become one of the most premier races of the international calendar, and it was an amazing feat that this year's winner participated in the King George at Ascot, even if the result was a little disappointing. OSAF also holds various technical assemblies, most recently inviting their chemists, veterinarian, and equine welfare specialists to Buenos Aires. Their firm position at improving rankings and pattern, a no-medication policy, and breeding activity in South America display why this part of the world is poised for growth in the years to come, especially on the betting side, where there is great potential for growth. The Pan American Conference, led by the Jockey Club and LARC, has seen 2 very successful conferences in New York 2 years ago and Washington, D.C. last May, assembling many great minds, both inside and outside racing. This cooperation between 2 different continents in the planning and execution of these events show that the objectives and threats to racing are shared and can be met together. Congratulations to you, Jim, Horacio, Pablo, and Andrew Chesser for achieving this success. And as you have learned today, the Asian Racing Conference, to be held for the 37th time in Korea, is a brilliant and impressive display of the development and influence of Asian Racing Federation countries, 2/3 of the betting in the world. You must never forget it. The expansion of commingling in Hong Kong and simulcasting in Japan, as well as the growing breeding influence in Korea and China, among others, indicate that racing must continually look east. I look forward to the Asian Racing Conference in Seoul and the energy and guidance from Winfried and Andrew in the RRF. While we can bask in past success, clearly our challenge lay before us. The global integrity of racing is paramount and cannot be met in an insincere or incomplete manner. The IFHA's position on doping control has never wavered. The appointment of the 5 reference labs signaled to racing bodies and participants that this industry has labs with the capacity of testing at the highest possible levels in nearly every part of the world. We will further develop these labs and are ready to receive applications from others who wish to meet these standards, which rise above normal accreditation. But as each of you know, post-race analysis is incomplete without robust out-of-competition protocol. I hope that our entire delegation will leave this meeting determined to implement strong out-of-competition testing. While the resources needed to execute this testing can seem daunting, it is most definitely an investment that is not put in place, that if not put in place, will eradicate confidence in our sport and creates an unfair playing field for our customers and participants. After speaking of those that partake in our industry, I'm consistently reminded by many of them that the disjointed protocols and policies that apply from one country to the next are a hindrance to the growth of our sport. This applies in every facet of the industry. Harmonization is needed now more than ever, from interference rules to reciprocity of suspended horses, riders and trainers, and anti-doping policy. And I'm sure the EXCO tomorrow will do and take more steps in that direction. Our stakeholders demand it, and our bettors and punters are now even more aware of these differences, which will ultimately affect turnover, especially given the growing importance of global simulcasting and commingling, as we saw today. Turning now to one of the more pressing issues that both equine and social consequences, horse welfare. Racing does not need to look very far to understand that the public sentiment to animal welfare is constantly evolving. Without meaningful internal reform in the retirement and retraining of racehorses, medication policy, and the movement of horses, our industry will be ripe for outside intervention. I commend the work of our Horse Welfare Committee, which has produced a series of best practice for our members to review when implementing welfare policy. I also must applaud the inaugural meeting of the IFHA Forum of the aftercare of racehorses in Washington, D.C., and I look forward to more good work from that gathering in the years to come. And as the transport of horses involves proper treatment, care, and housing of our equine athletes, which are all welfare issues, you will see the Federation be more actively linked with other stakeholders, such as the FEI and OIE, through our International Horse Sports Confederation with FEI. Safe and effective disease control management, while being mindful of movement, must be a primary discussion point as we continue to grow global racing. And because our industry is increasingly international, our customers are following the biggest race meetings more intently. Fans are taken to follow the careers of Arrogate, Wings, Enable, and Ulysses, that was written before the Ark, through digital and social media. Punters are eager for information, are to bet on the biggest meetings such as the Qatar Prix de Triomphe, Longines Irish Champion Weekend, Breeders' Cup, Longines Hong Kong International Races, amongst others. As shown in the figures for the 2016 ARC, 33 million euros alone bet from Japan, and for 2017 we had a figure of 27 million euros on the ARC, which is a good result with a Japanese horse who didn't have a first chance. And it makes business sense to expand beyond our normal borders. So what are the next steps? We must prepare the election of the chairman and vice chairman, which will be held at the Executive Council meeting in Korea during the next Asian Racing Conference in May 2018, with the current term to go end in October next year. We must review in detail the result of the previously constructed strategic plan and update that guiding document of 36 pages for the next term to come. And it will be the priority of our Secretary General, of our Executive Director, and both Andrews will have to concentrate on that with the support of the chairman of all our committees, because it's always, every 3 years, an important time to review what has been achieved, what is a success, what should become a priority for the next term to come. In closing, I would like to thank our 3 vice chairmen, Winfried, Jim, and Brian, and all of our Executive Council members for their support, time, and resources, because for all these racing authorities or bodies, it means a lot of expenses, and by these days, it's not always easy to justify them. I would like to extend my appreciation to Andrew Harding and Andrew Chesser, our committee chairs and vice chair, for the hard work they produce for the Federation through the year, free of charge. Catherine Mingot has been a wonderful addition as secretary to the Federation, and I must also thank Clémence Bruyère-Dawson, who has been assisting her. Thank you to our technical advisors, including our old friend Roland de Volz. Thank you to the leadership and management of France Gallo, including President Edouard de Rothschild, Jean-Pierre Colombu, Jean Dindy, our 2 vice chairmen, Olivier Deslois, our chief executive officer, Henri Pouret, and all their teams. Also, thank you to Saturn Productions, Shannon Luce, and our interpreters, who are always doing a marvelous job for making this conference such a smooth event. Thank you to everyone watching here and abroad on our website. I would, before showing the film, remind 2 technical points. I've been told, because now our secretary wants to improve our results, can you please return your badge or leave it on the table in order, and try to come back again next year in order we don't have to produce additional badge. Please, if you cannot come to the dinner, can you please tell Andrew Chesser in order we don't have some empty tables that it can happen. The bus leaves at 6:30 for a 7:30 arrival at the Intercontinental. Now we will move to the Arc, and we'll give you a few figures. So as I told you, the figures for Japan was it was nearly 26 million euros, 25,925. And we also had good result with Hong Kong, because Hong Kong took 2 more races, because we changed the order of the races. We put the race for Arabian horses before the Arc, and so we had a series of 4 Group 1 that could be taken. And on Cross has been, it was simulcasting, not yet commingling, but it will come soon, as we were told. And it was 5.3 last year and 7.9 this year million euros. So it's good result. The betting in France for the weekend was nearly the same, 0.9 difference, with a better result on Saturday than Sunday. And the betting on course was much better on Sunday, with an increase of 11%. So now, to finish, we will show you, as usual, the Arc de Triomphe.
Faites du bruit! La plus grande course du monde, le Qatar Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, 96e édition, avec un très bon départ de Cloth of Stars, mais également de la grandissime favorite. Elle s'appelle Enable, elle est montée par Frankie Dettori, vient tout de suite s'installer aux commandes avec un Anglais qui vient à ses côtés, c'est Ulysses, qui porte le numéro 4, il est monté par Jim Crowley. À son extérieur, Galop Idaho avec Order of St. George qui est en 4e position, alors que l'Allemand, le numéro 8, et Distinguished Secret se rapproche maintenant. On retrouve également la grise Winter qui se rapproche à la corde avec le lauréat du prix du Jockey Club, c'est Bramto qui progresse à l'intérieur. Pour l'instant, le numéro 13, 7-7 est en retrait, accompagné par le numéro 1, Zarak, le fils de la grande Zarkava, qui patiente pour l'instant avec le numéro 6, Silver Wave, qui est en dernière position. Enable, quel avantage que Zach Vertocrose avec Idaho qui est à la corde, alors qu'à l'extérieur, Galop, Order of St. George, pour l'instant, ce sont les concurrents irlandais qui occupent les 2 premières places. Bramto a une bonne course, il est 3e avec Ulysses, qui est maintenant en 5e position, accompagné par Winter. Winter qui vient à la corde. En revanche, l'Allemand Dishingis Secret est pour l'instant contraint de se rapprocher en épaisseur et vient avec le Japonais, le numéro 9, Satono Diamond. Capri patientant toujours dans la deuxième moitié du peloton. Il vient notamment à la hauteur pratiquement du numéro 3, One Foot in Heaven, avec le 13, 7-7 qui est en retrait également. On retrouve également le numéro 2, Doha Dream, qui galope à l'arrière-garde devant le numéro 6, Silver Wave. Il passe devant les grandes écuries avec toujours Idaho qui mène devant Order of St. George qui vient à son extérieur avec Kinnable qui se montre brillante, semble-t-il, est en troisième place devant Bramto qui voyage très bien, qui est quatrième avec Winter, avec Dishingis Secret à l'extérieur. On retrouve ensuite notamment le numéro 10, Satono Noblesse, ou encore le japonais Satono Diamond qui vient maintenant à l'extérieur, alors que les concurrents vont bientôt déboucher dans la dernière ligne droite. Toujours les Irlandais qui ont l'avantage. Idaho, TT Cord, Order of St. George qui vient à son extérieur. Hinable qui est en troisième position. Bramto est quatrième. Dishingis Secret qui revient, Plumatique qui est là également, avec Ulysses, avec Winter également qui tente de se rapprocher. Le numéro 9, Satono Diamond, qui maintenant est lancé à environ 300 mètres du but, avec la grande favorite Hinable qui maintenant est lancé à la corde par Frankie Dettori, mais Ulysses qui vient à son extérieur. Et voilà également Close of Stars qui est lancé à son tour par Michael Barzalona, mais Hinable repart maintenant avec Close of Stars, avec Ulysses qui est là. Hinable, incroyable ici, la police qui va enlever l'Arc de Triomphe. 5e victoire dans la course pour Frankie Dettori. Close of Stars est un incroyable deuxième. La 3e place pour Ulysses.